Keep it simple and follow your heart. The story of a young woman in America. If you ask me about words that encapsulate both youthful hope and bittersweet fate, the phrase, "keep it simple and follow your heart," a quote once posted on social media by Natalie Chen, sings out loud and clear. Natalie was not just a regular exchange student, she was the kind of person that lights up rooms and hearts alike. With a warm smile, persistent curiosity, and the free-spirited blend of an Asian American upbringing, she embodied what many might call the American dream set in motion. Raised by loving parents who immigrated from China to the US in search of opportunity, Natalie grew up in a modest but bustling home in Northern California. An only child, she was at once the hope and joy of her family. Her laugh echoing from kitchen to classroom, her relentless drive a daily source of pride. Friends often described her as equal parts gentle and fierce, and teachers would point out her willingness to help any newcomer find their footing. By the time she entered the University of Southern California as a communications major, Natalie had left a trail of vibrant memories in every community she joined. She blogged about her transition to college life, often sharing not only her creative inspirations, music playlists, food adventures, city lights, but also her vulnerabilities, homesickness, the pressure to succeed, that ever-present undercurrent of wanting to make her parents proud while finding her unique voice in a sprawling, multifaceted America. My plan? I just want to keep things simple and follow my heart. That's what my dad always told me, she wrote in a late-night post accompanied by a photo of her in front of a sunlit Los Angeles mural. There was sincerity and naivety in those words, a beautiful mix that made her so relatable to other international students or first-generation Americans. Natalie believed, perhaps stubbornly, that happiness was a product of authenticity. Complexity would find us all sooner or later, she mused. But courage to listen to the heart. That was a choice each person could make daily. Music played a steady role in her daily life, a kind of gentle soundtrack keeping anxieties at bay. She curated playlists that echoed her moods, comforting indie folk for lonely nights, vibrant pop for mornings before a challenging class, traditional Chinese ballads during holiday seasons far from home. Natalie's Spotify account was a patchwork of worlds, and she often sent song recommendations to friends, struggling to find words for their worries. What set Natalie apart was her refusal to compartmentalize her life. She built bridges everywhere, between cultures, between classmates and professors, between ambition and compassion. Even as she chased internships at high-profile media firms, she made time for small kindnesses, volunteering at community centers, recording uplifting videos for incoming international students, comforting a roommate through heartbreak. The phrase, "keep it simple and follow your heart," was not just a poster on her wall, it informed her actions, choices, and her entire approach to living as an international student in America. Yet, as she prepared to step into her post-grad life in the spring of 2019, planning a career in media communications, Natalie's optimism never wavered. She spoke of future cities to explore, possible grad programs, and of one day bringing her parents to a bustling media event where her achievements would be on display for them. For Natalie, the American experience was a mosaic, equal parts joy and struggle, solitude and community, dreams and harsh realities. Through it all, she kept reminding herself, and those who followed her journey, that life didn't need to be overcomplicated. If you stayed true to your heart, she wrote, you could find your way even in the darkest moments. Looking back now, those words have taken on a haunting resonance, but at the time they summed up everything Natalie, and so many young hopeful souls, strive to embody on unfamiliar shores. For her and for the countless others building futures abroad, these words are both a song of hope and a gentle caution. Keep it simple, but never ignore the voice within. International students and the American dream. For countless students around the world, America is more than a country. It is a canvas for ambition. In the late-night group chats of teenagers from Shanghai to Sao Paulo, the phrase American dream is whispered with excitement and hope. For these international students, the land of opportunity means more than skyscrapers in Silicon Valley. It symbolizes the promise of self-discovery, growth, and a future unconstrained by borders. Every year, hundreds of thousands of international students arrive in the United States, with Asians consistently making up the largest share. Universities like Columbia, Stanford, NYU, and the University of Southern California buzz with diverse voices, stories, and dreams. In 2023 alone, over 300,000 new arrivals, armed with acceptance letters, oversized suitcases, and hearts full of hope, stepped into this complex new world. To parents back home, sending a child abroad is an act of trust and sacrifice. For families in China, India, Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, such a move represents both pride and anxiety. They know these students must build community from scratch, manage daily life in a foreign language, and wrestle with homesickness, uncertainty, and the pressure to succeed, not only for themselves, but often for all those watching from halfway across the globe. For these students, the American dream is rarely a straight line. Life is marked by contrasts, moments of triumph, a perfect grade, making a new friend, landing an internship, juxtaposed against struggles with culture shock, loneliness, and financial worries. Campus life can be exhilarating and intimidating all at once. Yet the international student experience is also a masterclass in resilience and adaptability. Juggling academics, part-time jobs, and the logistics of visas and paperwork, these students learn to solve problems, advocate for themselves, and find beauty in small victories. Academic rigor aside, the American campus can be a place of unexpected transformation. Here, international students explore new ideas, question old truths, and begin building a voice uniquely their own. For some, it's their first taste of independence. For others, it's learning to cook their favorite comfort foods when homesickness creeps in, or navigating relationships without the guidance of family elders just a phone call away. Cultural clubs, international nights, and city excursions become essential threads in the fabric of their new identities. These experiences foster a sense of belonging, even in unfamiliar waters. Social media plays its role too, allowing students to share triumphs and setbacks in real time, drawing support both from new friends abroad and loved ones back home. Though their journeys differ, nearly all international students are united by a desire to make the most of their American adventure. For some, that means chasing a prestigious career. For others, it's about mastering English, falling in love, or simply carving out a space where they can be wholly themselves. The risks are real: racism, xenophobia, and the challenge of maintaining mental health far from home, but so are the rewards. Across the United States, the international student story is the story of persistence, transformation, and the limitless possibilities that emerge when one chooses to dream beyond borders. Overcoming family tragedy. Throughout her adolescence, Celine's life was shaped by both warmth and tragedy, a paradox that molded her resilience and character. Born in 1995 in Shanghai to loving parents, Celine's world was turned upside down during her junior year of high school. The catastrophe arrived in the form of a devastating earthquake that struck her hometown, claiming the life of her father. It was a loss that brought her world crashing down, leaving just her and her mother, two souls forced to navigate a sea of grief together. Despite the overwhelming sorrow, Celine's relationship with her mother only grew stronger and more symbiotic. Her mother, though deeply affected, poured what remained of her strength and hope into nurturing her daughter's future. Suddenly, Celine wasn't just a child. She became her mother's confidant, anchor, and sole support. The intimacy of their new normal forged an unspoken pact. Celine would do everything in her power to carve out a future that would make her father proud and give her mother solace. During those late-night study sessions for college entrance exams, the weight of loss pressed on her, yet it never completely subdued her spirit. She channeled her grief into determination. While friends sometimes saw only her gentle smile and sense of humor, there was a gravity behind her eyes, a knowledge of fragility, of how quickly everything could change. Family gatherings became quieter, memories more precious, and every milestone, her graduation, every award or recognition, was shared with both the memory of her father and the living presence of her mother. By the time she was accepted to a top university in California for communications, Celine had already proven to herself, and to her tight-knit circle, that tragedy need not define her destiny. Her mother, recognizing both the risks and the opportunities of an international education, encouraged her to reach for this new horizon, even if it meant the two of them would live an ocean apart. The move to America represented more than academic ambition. It was a leap of faith, a testament to her family's courage. Celine viewed each challenge through the lens of her past trauma, adjusting to a new country, balancing jobs and classes, making friends, combating homesickness, with a sense of perspective few of her peers could understand. Whenever obstacles seemed insurmountable, she remembered nights spent comforting her mother, the silence they both survived, and the promise not to let pain dictate her future. That, she believed, was real strength, not the absence of grief, but the power to build something beautiful in spite of it. Through it all, Celine stood as living proof that hardship could kindle drive instead of despair. The legacy of her late father lived on in her spirit, and the unwavering love of her mother formed both a safety net and a source of courage as she faced each new horizon. Study abroad. Journey and life in the United States. Celine's journey to study in the United States marked a profound turning point in her life, a leap into both excitement and the vast unknown. In the fall of 2015, she arrived in Los Angeles, her heart brimming with hope, fear, and the echoes of both past sorrow and future possibility. The air at LAX carried a sense of limitless opportunity, but also the sharp realization that everything familiar had been left an ocean away. Staying at her cousin's home in the quiet Pasadena suburbs, Celine was immediately embraced as family. Her cousin Anna, a gentle and resourceful woman, was married to Ben, a first-generation German-American with 2 teenage children from a prior relationship. From the beginning, they treated Celine as one of their own, weaving her into the daily conversations over crowded dinners, and including her in family outings, barbecues, and weekend hikes in the San Gabriel Mountains. For Celine, the warmth of this household helped soothe the ache of homesickness, yet it also reminded her of the life she had lost, the completeness of her family back in Shanghai, fractured by tragedy. University life was an entirely new world. The campus of her chosen institution, California State University, Los Angeles, was sprawling and energetic. Here, Celine found herself surrounded by classmates whose backgrounds spanned continents, each of them carrying their own complicated stories and ambitions. The diversity on campus forced her to rethink her previously held worldviews. It was in classrooms, student clubs, and late-night study sessions where Celine allowed herself to slowly shed her protective shell. She struggled at first to keep up with the fast-paced lectures and idiomatic expressions, but her determination never faltered. She relied on the kindness of bilingual professors, attended extra help sessions, and often sought advice from upperclassmen who had already navigated the bewildering American educational system. Financial concerns were ever present. Despite the support of her mother back in China and Anna's willingness to offer her a roof over her head, Celine took on part-time jobs, first as a barista in a campus cafe, then as a peer tutor in the International Student Office. Every paycheck, no matter how small, represented a step toward self-sufficiency and a source of pride for her mother. She learned quickly the value of budgeting, how to live modestly, and how to send a little money home, even when it meant foregoing luxuries her peers seemed to enjoy without thought. Socially, her life was a delicate balancing act. Celine forged meaningful friendships with students from across the globe, a roommate from Brazil who taught her samba, a Korean classmate who shared late-night ramen and stories of growing up in Seoul, and a Mexican-American student who introduced her to mariachi and the vibrant culture of East LA. Yet, even in these circles, she sometimes felt the latent weight of being an outsider. She missed her mother's home-cooked meals, the comfort of speaking Mandarin without pause, and the vibrant festival traditions of her youth. To combat the loneliness, she threw herself into student organizations, volunteering for campus activities, and organizing cultural exchange nights that brought hundreds of students together. Gradually, Celine began to see Los Angeles through her own eyes, a patchwork of skyscrapers, palm-lined boulevards, and unexpected moments of joy. A sunrise over the Griffith Observatory, the first time she ordered coffee without stumbling over her English, the laughter shared in cramped dorm kitchens with friends. It was a life defined by change, a bittersweet dance between letting go of the old and forging the new. All the while she privately kept a journal, documenting her journey with brutal honesty, notes about her anxiety, victories large and small, and the dreams she still dared to hope for despite the struggles. Above all, Celine's story was not one of unbroken happiness, but of resilience and tenacious hope. Facing homesickness, academic pressure, and the realities of living independently in a foreign country, she became a beacon of support for other international students. She carved out a community amid cultural divides and found meaning not only in academic accolades but in everyday acts of kindness, courage, and patience. The journey was far from effortless, but in embracing every challenge, Celine discovered not just the American dream, but a version of herself that neither tragedy nor distance could erase. Days of peace and early success. Those first few years after arriving in America, once the whirlwind of adaptation had slowed and the initial rawness of homesickness dulled to a quiet ache, were marked by moments of genuine peace, and for Celine, unexpected glimmers of early success. It was during this period that she truly learned to savor both the mundane and the extraordinary, gradually weaving the tapestry of a new life far from home. Every morning Celine would wake up to the gentle sunlight filtering through the curtains of her modest Pasadena bedroom. There was comfort in the small rituals she created for herself, preparing a cup of fragrant jasmine tea, reviewing her schedule of classes and work shifts, sending a quick WeChat message to her mother just to say, "I'm okay." These seemingly trivial acts became her anchors. In the tranquil moments before the city stirred, Celine found clarity, drawing strength from both nostalgia and the promise of the day ahead. Academically, Celine began to shine. She was an active, engaged student in her communications program, earning top marks on projects and presentations that allowed her creativity to flourish. Her multilingual ability made her a favorite among both American professors and newly arrived international students, for whom she often translated and offered peer guidance. The university took notice. In her sophomore year, she was nominated as an International Student Ambassador, a role that gave her a platform to bridge cultural gaps and welcome others into the fold. Outside the classroom, Celine's world widened. She landed a highly competitive internship at a Los Angeles media company, a position that, for many international students, seemed out of reach. From navigating the city's labyrinthine public transit after late shifts to learning the unspoken etiquette of corporate America, every challenge became a lesson in grit. Celine's supervisors admired her adaptability and poise under pressure. More than once she was entrusted with tasks normally reserved for full-time staff. The small victories, a thank you email from a manager, praise during team meetings, even the first time her work was published under her own byline, sparked a deep sense of accomplishment and belonging. Her social life blossomed too. The friendships she forged stretched across continents, study groups morphing into impromptu picnics at Echo Park, potluck dinners where Korean kimchi, Brazilian pão de queijo, and Sichuan hot pot mingled on one table. Celine loved sharing snapshots of these moments, her beaming face illuminated by the city's neon glow, arms looped around friends above the twinkling downtown skyline. Her social media presence was vibrant and inspiring, inviting messages from both old friends in China and new peers in the States. But those peaceful days were never just about external achievements. For Celine, they were also about inner settlement. She learned to find beauty in the persistence required to thrive abroad, and pride in each step toward independence. Paying her own rent, budgeting for groceries, supporting her mother back home, these too were milestones earned through sweat and sacrifice. While gratitude and joy were her default settings, she never forgot to reflect on the journey that led her here, nor the people whose unwavering support underpinned every success. In these early years, with each new milestone, Celine felt the American dream come into focus, not as a sudden revelation but as a slow, ongoing unfolding. To her surprise, what once seemed out of reach became part of her everyday reality. She discovered that success, much like peace, is as much about the connections one cultivates and the resilience quietly honed along the way as it is about external recognition. And though she knew storms might someday come, these were, at last, days she could call her own. The sudden shadow descends. In the gentle lull after finals week, Los Angeles was sweltering, restless, alive. Celine's calendar was dotted with summer plans, weekend hikes, a movie marathon with friends, volunteering events at school. The overwhelming sense was one of arrival, of finally, after years of struggle, being able to breathe a little easier, feel at home in a world once so foreign and intimidating. For the first time, her life had settled into rhythms. The morning sunlight through her window, jasmine tea in hand, quick good morning texts pinging back and forth with her mother in China, and the familiar clatter of breakfast shared with Anna and Ben. June and July melted together in a haze of laughter, small victories, and moments of youthful dreaming. Nobody in Celine's orbit, a mosaic of international students, professors, community members, and family, had the faintest inkling of the darkness that was about to fall. To them, she was the very image of resilience, someone who had weathered far too much and yet remained unbroken, optimistic, and full of hope. She was an anchor for friends still haunted by their own homesickness, a mentor to new arrivals lost in the sprawling city, and a pillar for her family, always sending cheerful photos and bits of encouragement across thousands of miles. The day the shadow arrived began with rain. Soft, unseasonal, almost celebratory. Celine joked to Anna over breakfast that LA only cried when it missed Shanghai too. She sent her mother a voice memo, her laughter ringing through the phone. "I'm happy, Mom. Really, you don't need to worry about me." Anna kissed her goodbye, reminding her to stop by the bakery and bring home her favorite pastries, and headed to work. Ben, having recently found freelance work, stayed home that morning. It was, by all outward accounts, an ordinary day. That was the last anyone saw or heard from Celine. By late afternoon, Anna's cheerful group text to the family chat went unanswered, a first for Celine, who, no matter how busy, never failed to assure everyone of her well-being. Friends messaged her on WeChat, then WhatsApp, then frantic calls began. The following day her phone was still unreachable, messages piled up unanswered like fallen leaves. Worried, Anna contacted Celine's classmates and learned she hadn't shown up for either work or her volunteer shift. Both commitments she had never missed, even during bouts of illness or stress. The sensation in Anna's gut spiraled from mild concern to full-blown dread. The next nights were sleepless. Anna retraced Celine's commutes, called friends, checked local ERs. Ben, when asked, claimed Celine had mentioned meeting a friend at Echo Park for coffee. The story seemed plausible. Celine often used the park as a mental reset during tough semesters, but something about his answers didn't sit right. Anna noticed Ben was more withdrawn than usual, making vague excuses about stress and projects. He retreated to the garage, avoiding conversations and phone calls. The house felt colder, shadows lingering along the hallway as if holding their breath. News travels fast within the international student community. Celine's disappearance became the anxious refrain in every group chat and social media thread. Flyers with her photo appeared on notice boards at campus cafes and supermarkets. Friends organized small search groups, scouring parks, bus stops, city blocks, their voices shaking with exhaustion but never losing hope. Her mother, back in Shanghai, was caught in endless limbo. Unable to fly out immediately, she waited by the phone, heart thrumming with every ring, imagining and denying 1,000 possible explanations. When the police got involved, they found the case frustrating. No evidence of forced entry, no known recent arguments or threats, no indication that Celine had planned to leave abruptly. Her social media, a journal of joy and vulnerability, showed no signs of distress. Surveillance footage from campus and the nearby neighborhood placed her returning home that fateful morning, her figure calm and purposeful as always. And then, nothing. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Vigils were held, candles flickering on the university quad. Friends and strangers alike came together in solidarity, holding on to faith, remembering Celine's unyielding optimism and her belief in people. Professors, classmates, and neighbors recounted stories of her kindness, the late-night study sessions she hosted, the food she delivered to others during exams, the gentle insistence that nobody be left out. People described the void left behind as tangible, a cool ache where her laughter had been. Behind closed doors, trauma and fear tangled with routine. Anna cycled between hope and horror, pushing through paperwork, fielding endless interviews with investigators, and comforting Celine's mother through video calls. Ben became increasingly distant, changeable, prone to silent rages or brooding insomnia. The tension in the house thickened, an emotional fog so heavy it pressed itself into every corner. As the days wore on, the media caught wind. Reports ran on local TV and Chinese international outlets. Brilliant Shanghai student missing in Los Angeles, family pleads for help. The lack of answers, the mounting questions, the long hours without certainty, stretched like barbed wire through the family's life. For weeks nobody slept properly. Every knock at the door, every ring of the phone carried with it the weight of both hope and terror. In those blurred days, Anna found herself cleaning Celine's room, hoping the stale laundry and scattered notebooks might offer clues, or at least preserve the ordinary sense of her niece's life. She ran her fingers over handwritten postcards taped by Celine's desk, a collage of dreams. Think bravely, dream wildly, love without regret. Among her things, Anna found a diary with entries about missing her father, loving her mother, and the strange comfort she'd discovered in new friendships. There was longing but also profound gratitude, and yet nothing in those words, written barely a day before her disappearance, hinted at fear. Meanwhile, Celine's circle, strained by helplessness, held on to hope. Some, more pragmatic, started to prepare for the worst, seeking legal aid, scheduling meetings with university officials. Others doubled down on the search, scouring online forums, revisiting places Celine loved. The community's collective anxiety grew, palpable in every whispered conversation, every awkward silence at events that Celine used to organize. In retrospect, people would try to pinpoint the moment when innocence dissolved, when the easy sheen of a hopeful summer was shattered by the arrival of true danger. In reality, it happened quietly, invisibly, as tragedies always do, transforming the ordinary into the unimaginable. Only later would the signs seem obvious. Ben's evasiveness, Celine's sudden silence, the troubled undercurrents in their once peaceful home. That was how the darkness fell over Celine's story, not with a scream but with a slow, drawn-out absence, a silence that hurt to the touch, echoing in every empty space she once filled. And in that void, friends and family waited, and hoped, and began to realize that sometimes, even in the safest seeming places, the worst shadows are those you never see coming. The investigation begins. In the aftermath of Celine's sudden disappearance, the bustling city of Los Angeles transformed overnight into a web of questions, rumors, and mounting dread. Within hours of her absence becoming apparent, a police report was filed. What started as a missing persons case swiftly took on a darker undertone as days passed without a single trace, and anxiety spread through the campus and international student community like wildfire. Celine's Aunt Anna was relentless. She collaborated desperately with local law enforcement, reaching out to every friend and faculty member, piecing together timelines, organizing neighborhood canvases, and printing flyers with Celine's radiant smile. Anna's home, once a haven, turned into a headquarters for volunteers, her dining table now covered in city maps, lists of contacts, and marked calendars. Friends and even strangers came together to help, taking different quadrants of the city, their nerves frayed by every unreturned call and dead end. From the outset, the detectives were methodical. Their first moves involved interviewing every individual in Celine's life: professors, classmates, roommates, Anna and Ben, friends from her part-time jobs, and even neighbors who could recall the smallest detail about the week she vanished. The interviews painted a portrait of a young woman well-loved, kind, and unusually responsible. It became clear that this was not someone who would disappear by choice or without warning. Officers combed through Celine's digital life for any discernible clues. Her phone records, social media, last text messages, ride-share histories, all were scrutinized. Her last texts were warm and ordinary, showing no hint of premeditated flight or distress. Video surveillance footage from campus, nearby transportation hubs, and the perimeter of Anna's quiet neighborhood was reviewed frame by frame. They traced Celine's movements up to the morning of her disappearance, entering the house, appearing calm, purposeful, her usual self. After that, the trail went cold. As days stretched into a tense, sleepless week, the emotional toll became obvious. Celine's mother, powerless an ocean away, spent each moment glued to her phone, her hands shaking whenever the screen lit up. Anna, outwardly composed for the sake of the family and media, crumbled in the privacy of her room each night. The international student community felt the aftershocks, many reliving memories of their own anxieties and fears as outsiders wrestling with the unknown. A cloud of vulnerability descended, the knowledge that even those who seemed the safest, the happiest, were not immune to tragedy. Detectives brought in forensic experts to analyze every possible trace in Anna's home and the surrounding streets. Celine's bedroom, left exactly as she had that morning with her notebook lying open and coffee cup still half full, became a nexus of evidence. Forensics dusted every surface for fingerprints and fibers. They examined the doorways for signs of forced entry or struggle, but found none. Outside, the police searched bushes, dumpsters, and alleyways, combing through the mundane in hope of discovering something extraordinary. Meanwhile, word of Celine's disappearance reached local media. Los Angeles news outlets flashed her photo across screens, headlines alternating between hope and grim speculation. The Chinese expatriate media picked up the story, and soon, anxious relatives and family friends from Shanghai to San Francisco were calling Anna's already overloaded phone, offering prayers, theories, and, unfortunately, sometimes wild, unfounded rumors. The pressure mounted. The case captured attention partly because Celine was an international student whose story echoed the dreams and anxieties of thousands in the Asian diaspora. Vigils were held on campus and in public parks. Students lit candles and set up makeshift memorials. Others held meetings to discuss safety and campus resources, desperately seeking reassurance. The university provided counseling for students and opened a crisis hotline as fear and uncertainty gripped the community. Picking up on mounting leads, detectives began to notice subtle inconsistencies in stories given by those closest to Celine. Ben, who had largely retreated into silence, was interviewed multiple times. Each retelling of his story exposed minor inconsistencies, details about the morning's activities, his recollections of Celine's mood, and small changes in his timeline for that day. Analysts scrutinized his phone and computer. Internet search histories and old emails began to raise red flags. While investigators worked behind closed doors, Anna faced a different kind of torment. She fielded press questions, coordinated with law enforcement, and tried to remain strong for Celine's mother. She relived every memory of Celine's time in California, looking for missed signs. A misunderstood sigh, a cryptic message, a glance that now seemed loaded with meaning. Guilt and worry gnawed at her, but there was no time to fall apart. The investigation gained new urgency on the fourth day, when a discovery was made at Echo Park Lake, a large black plastic bag, reported by a kayaker. Divers and forensic teams raced to the scene. What they found made headlines and injected fresh urgency into the investigation. The remains of a young woman, left unceremoniously. Identification required forensics, but the hope that Celine might return home safely began to wane. The crime scene brought a tidal wave of media coverage and public interest. Forensic specialists worked around the clock to analyze evidence. Physical clues, clothing fibers, traces of DNA, fragments of a sweater, pieces of jewelry, helped narrow the search for answers. The autopsy was grueling. Wounds indicated foul play and a prolonged struggle. Detectives focused their attention on timeline reconstruction, matching call logs, security footage, financial transactions, and eyewitness statements. Beyond the evidence, they tried to piece together the human narrative. Celine's aspirations, her plans for that week, and possible hints about conflicts or problems she never let anyone see. Ben, Anna, and anyone in Celine's orbit became critical pieces in the puzzle, their connections to her scrutinized from every angle. The campus, meanwhile, transformed. Murals and vigil sites multiplied. International student advisors organized information sessions on legal rights, personal safety, and local support resources. The community, once united by hope, now found solace in solidarity, coping together with shared grief and anxiety. Throughout these relentless days, officers never lost sight of the heartbreak at the center of the storm. Though every case was personal, this one hit especially hard. A bright young life extinguished, a family shattered, and a campus plagued with the question that would echo for months. How could such a thing happen to someone so full of promise, in a city meant to represent opportunity and security for those far from home? Internally, the investigation team was increasingly convinced that the answer lay close to home. Carefully, they reviewed Ben's history, his immigration records, employment gaps, and behavioral background. Experts constructed psychological profiles, searching for patterns of obsession or instability. Meanwhile, officers executed search warrants for computers and cell phones, seizing hard drives and old USBs from the house. Digital forensics trawled through every byte, seeking hidden files, chat logs, deleted emails, anything that could shed light on motives, opportunity, or state of mind. As facts slowly emerged, Anna found herself tested in every way imaginable. She was called to the police station repeatedly to clarify small contradictions or to confirm memories from that week. The process was painstaking, respectful but emotionally punishing. She oscillated between hope for an overlooked clue and fear of what deeper truths the investigation might reveal. Simultaneously, she cared for Celine's mother, now frail, devastated, and clinging to Anna as her only support in the U.S. The detectives' persistence began to pay off. Forensic results showed traces of Celine's blood on an item of men's clothing found in a garage storage box. Digital evidence, including troubling search terms and images on Ben's seized computer, began to form a chilling pattern. Still, law enforcement faced immense pressure to proceed with both caution and urgency, knowing the public was watching and a grieving mother was desperate for answers. As summer faded into fall, the weeks following Celine's disappearance and the subsequent discovery at Echo Park marked a devastating new chapter for everyone touched by her story. The slow wheels of justice and investigation tested the patience and emotional stamina of her family and friends. Each day, Anna and the community confronted the harsh reality that seeking the truth was a marathon, not a sprint. Public rallies, memorial services, and online petitions kept her memory alive, even as the official search for answers dragged on. Detectives continued to build their case brick by brick. They worked closely with prosecutors, ensuring due process was followed while never losing sight of Celine, the passionate, hopeful, and beloved student who had come to America for a better life. Their commitment ensured that the investigation, though slow and methodical, would stand up to scrutiny and ultimately deliver justice for Celine and closure, however incomplete, for those who loved her. In the weeks before any arrest was made, the case of Celine became more than one tragedy. It became a rallying cry and a collective reckoning for all who had journeyed to a foreign land seeking new beginnings, a painful reminder to stay vigilant, to support one another in adversity, and to push, relentlessly, together, for truth when darkness descends unexpectedly. Causes of death and a terrifying obsession. The findings from the autopsy were nothing short of horrifying. As the medical examiner detailed each brutal wound found on Celine's body, a dark and negative energy seemed to seep from the report itself. It was revealed that Celine had been bound before her death. There were more than 30 stab wounds, each one echoing the unimaginable fear and suffering she had endured in her final moments. News of these violent details spread rapidly, shaking the international student community to its core and unleashing a tide of fear among Asian American families throughout the United States. The attack's violence was not simply shocking because of its savagery, but because it felt so utterly at odds with the Celine people knew, brilliant, kind, and always striving for peace. In the Chinese American communities of Los Angeles, vigils and acts of mourning multiplied overnight. Candles flickered before hastily improvised shrines, photos of Celine smiling, arms thrown around friends, surrounded by colorful flowers and messages of sorrow. The sense of loss was communal. Worry for children and friends across the globe became an undercurrent in daily conversations. Questions about safety, about whether the American dream was worth the risk, about hidden dangers lurking where one least expects. At the crime scene, the sense of devastation was intensified by the physical traces left behind. The recovery location near Echo Park Lake, a peaceful spot that had once been Celine's place of reflection, now carried a chilling and haunted reputation. As detectives and forensic teams combed through the muddy banks and weeds, they discovered several disturbing pieces of evidence. A length of cheap synthetic rope stained red, fragments of clothing tangled in undergrowth, broken jewelry whose meaning was known only to Celine and her mother. Much of the physical evidence had been damaged by water, a cruel stroke of chance that complicated the investigative process. Yet certain details could not be washed away. Bloodstains on the inside of a heavy men's jacket, a single sneaker tucked into the reeds, and the deep marks around her wrists that told the story of restraint and a struggle that went on far too long. There was also an emotional toll far beyond the forensic. Anna, who had been Celine's anchor in Los Angeles, received the coroner's report with a numbing sense of disbelief. She struggled to share the findings with Celine's mother, who was still stuck in Shanghai, unable to travel due to visa complications and paralyzing grief. The news delivered over crackling video calls broke the last shreds of hope that had stubbornly persisted in the family's hearts. Celine's mother, faced with unbearable truth, withdrew into herself, haunted by memories of her daughter's childhood and the echo of her laughter, in a home now silent and cold. The police kept parts of the investigation confidential, but word soon leaked into the wider community. There were whispers of a man's DNA found on the bloodied rope and on Celine's broken jewelry, rumors about evidence of prolonged surveillance and disturbing footage recovered from nearby home security cameras. Small, isolated details began to merge into a larger, more sinister picture. It soon became clear that this had not been a random act of violence. All signs pointed to premeditation and a level of personal fixation that cast a new, darker shadow over Celine's tragedy. The emotional aftershocks spread through the university campus as well. Fear, paranoia, and anger replaced the initial raw grief. Students and faculty attended campus forums, demanding stronger safety protocols, more transparency from university officials, and expanded counseling resources. Some students, especially women and those from international backgrounds, grew anxious and wary, reluctant to walk home alone or stay late on campus. The campus bulletin boards filled with flyers for self-defense workshops, support sessions, even group transport sign-ups, simple steps that suddenly felt profound. Celine's case quickly became a rallying point for social activism. Petitions circulated online, calling for legislative reform on campus safety and stricter oversight of host family programs. Prominent Asian American advocacy groups organized marches and press conferences, amplifying stories of discrimination, isolation, and the vulnerabilities faced by international students far from home. Hashtags bearing Celine's name went viral, encouraging victims and survivors everywhere to come forward and break the silence about their own fears and experiences. And though time dulled the acute shock, the traumatic ripple effect showed no sign of relenting for those closest to Celine. Anna, racked by guilt and regret over ever inviting her niece to stay, sought support in survivor groups, places where loss was communal and where she learned slowly to turn pain into advocacy. Celine's friends, for whom daily life was once punctuated by laughter and youthful plans, now wore grief like a second skin. Group chats turned into safe spaces for sharing anxiety, insomnia, and nightmares, all shadowed by the singular, unanswered question, why did this happen? The darkness of Celine's death became a persistent ache beneath the surface of the international student community. New arrivals to campus were met with warnings from upperclassmen, parents sent anxious messages from across the world, their texts full of "stay safe and never trust too easily." For faculty and counselors, each new international student arrival was welcome, but now fraught with an extra sense of responsibility. The dream of study abroad was no longer just about success, exploration, and bright futures. It was inextricably entangled with the need for vigilance, preparation, and honest conversations about risk. Perhaps the cruelest legacy of Celine's murder was not simply in the loss itself, but in the chilling knowledge that true danger may come not only from strangers in the shadows, but sometimes from within the very walls we thought of as safe. For every parent on the other side of the globe watching late-night news, for every student navigating unfamiliar streets in a new country, and for every friend left behind, shaken by loss, the memory of what happened to Celine remained as both a warning and, most painfully, a question that could never truly be answered. Suspicions turned inward, the unthinkable within family. At first, the anguish that engulfed Celine's family and friends in the days after her body was discovered grew into something even more harrowing, a deep sense of confusion, and soon, suspicion. The stunned, grieving community scoured their memories for a hint, a moment, anything that could have warned them of the truth hiding beneath the surface of daily life. Investigators, too, cast a wide net, working tirelessly as details began to coalesce into a troubling pattern. The painstaking work of reviewing surveillance footage from every conceivable vantage point around Anna's suburban neighborhood yielded a crucial breakthrough. Security cameras from homes up and down the block painted an increasingly clear timeline. The footage from the night of Celine's disappearance showed only 2 people at the house: Celine herself and her uncle by marriage, Ben. No forced entry, no unknown visitors, just the ordinary mundane quiet of a family home. Yet beneath that quiet, the seeds of suspicion were beginning to sprout. Detectives began focusing more closely on Ben, a man who had until now flown under the radar. He was reserved in public, rarely the center of attention at family gatherings. Still, he was polite, helpful, and at first glance, utterly unremarkable. No one could have imagined him as anything but a steady, if somewhat solitary presence. But everyone has shadows, especially those who feel unseen for too long. The police's attention zeroed in on the family computer, which Ben had used for years. Digital forensics specialists carefully recovered browsing history, image files, and remnants of communications previously thought deleted. What they found sent a chill through the investigative team, a disturbing archive of photos taken without consent, images of Celine in various rooms of the house, moments when she'd thought herself alone, studying or making tea late at night. There were also search terms and visits to websites that discussed not just violence, but methods of concealment, stories of crimes within domestic spaces, and survivor forums filled with fearful questions about boundaries and danger. Detectives faced the delicate task of balancing the shock these findings generated with the need to move carefully. After all, the stakes couldn't be higher. Slowly, softly, they began questioning Anna and other family members about Ben's habits, his relationship with Celine, and any off moments that had stood out. The responses, at first defensive or dismissive, gradually shifted. Anna remembered times Ben was unusually irritable when Celine was out with friends, or the way he sometimes forgot she needed rides home after work, leaving her stranded in the city. Friends shared that Ben's attempts at conversation had grown more awkward and invasive in the months prior. With each retelling, small details began to coalesce. The puzzle pieces were aligning in a way that was horrifying in its plausibility. Meanwhile, Ben's demeanor changed under observation. He was no longer just subdued but evasive, avoiding eye contact, skipping work, even changing his sleeping patterns. When called in for further questioning, he grew defensive, providing minute details for some activities and startled, inconsistent answers for others. The detective's questions grew more pointed. What had he been doing during the hours after Celine came home? Why had he deleted a week's worth of security footage? Why had there been repeated online searches for local police response times in the days before the tragedy? Investigators also uncovered odd gaps in Ben's work and personal history, long stretches of unemployment he'd concealed from family, references from prior jobs that had quietly suggested problems with boundaries and interpersonal behavior. His credit card records revealed odd purchases in the weeks prior to Celine's disappearance. Cleaning supplies, duct tape, gloves. One transaction in particular, an online order for a lockpicking kit, sent a palpable wave of dread through even the most seasoned officers. For Anna, the emotional toll was beyond description. As more evidence came to light, her mind replayed endless memories of Ben as a father figure, making pancakes for the kids, helping with home repairs, reading quietly in the living room. That this man, someone she'd married into the family, trusted with her children and her home, might have been behind such unthinkable horror was devastating. Her guilt at not seeing the warning signs became an overwhelming weight. Conversations with Celine's friends took on new meaning. Anna found herself wondering whether looks or sighs she'd chalked up to the stress of school were really silent pleas for help. The press discovered the pivot in the investigation. As rumors swirled, journalists camped outside Anna's home and news vans broadcast constant updates. The once supportive community grew circumspect, whispering about betrayal, trust, and the dangers that can lurk beneath the safe facade of family. Hashtags like #JusticeForCeline and #TrustNuan surged on social media. At candlelight vigils, parents drew their children close and wondered aloud how well they ever really knew those inside their own homes. The tragedy of suspicion turning inward resonated loudly through the Asian American community in Los Angeles and far beyond. The stereotype of the safe, intact immigrant family was shattered. Counselors at local universities reported surges in anxious international students seeking advice about living arrangements and personal safety. Established families reached out, offering support to those newly arrived and more isolated than ever before. Throughout it all, police continued their careful, methodical collection of evidence, building a deliberate case, determined not to let shock give way to shortcuts. Each new fact carried the burden of proof, each discovery a fresh layer of grief for those who had loved Celine. Hope for a more benign explanation faded as the full scope of Ben's obsession and subterfuge came into view. As the investigation built toward its conclusion, the sorrow in Celine's circle fused with anger. The betrayal from within, a unit meant to nurture and protect, was almost too much to bear. Yet there remained a shared determination among those left behind, to see the truth unearthed, to hold those responsible accountable, and somehow to transform unbearable pain into lasting vigilance, for Celine's memory and for every family touched by loss and hidden danger. Testimonies, trial, and the collapse of trust. The wheels of justice in Los Angeles turned slowly but relentlessly as Celine's case finally came to trial. The lead-up to those courtroom days was marked by a torrent of emotions, anguish, anticipation, and a deep, gnawing dread, not just for her family, but the entire international community who watched the proceedings unfold with bated breath. The courtroom itself, sterile, cavernous, and burdened with an atmosphere of unrelenting tension, felt impossibly far from the gentle warmth of Celine's daily life. But it also became the stage for one of the most painful reckonings any family could endure. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. Their evidence was methodical, almost clinical at times: the digital trail found on Ben's devices, the inconsistencies in his alibi, the forensic details that made denial nearly impossible. Screens in the courtroom flashed with images, a timeline of Celine's last known movements, screenshots of damning search histories, recovered photographs, even receipts for the supplies he had secretly purchased. Jurors flinched at the sheer intimacy of the data, the fact that so much horror had found its way into ordinary day-to-day objects: a computer, a phone, a kitchen drawer. Anna sat behind the prosecution, her knuckles white as she clutched a battered handkerchief. She was determined to see the process through for her sister and late niece, yet every new revelation deepened the already unthinkable wound. There were days when she had to leave the courtroom, unable to stomach the details, and Celine's mother, watching by video link from across the world, was silent, composed in posture but clearly suffering with each new fact that came to light. Ben, the accused, cut a lonely figure at the defense table. He was no longer the background presence of family gatherings or the helpful hand at home improvement projects. He had become a symbol of everything dark and unknowable lurking beneath familiarity. Dressed in prison garb, face gaunt and blank, he offered little outside of curt denials and the occasional stony glare. His defense team tried to paint a picture of mental distress, alluding to a history of anxiety, but the weight of the evidence was impossible to ignore. Witness testimonies became a somber procession of pain and bewilderment. Anna, voice trembling, described the cheerful routines of their household, now forever tainted. Celine's classmates and professors recounted her dreams, her optimism, and the way her presence had once lit up a room. Forensics experts pointed to critical moments: a deleted security video, blood traces found in the garage, Celine's DNA intermingled with Ben's on discarded clothing, each fact carved deeper into the family's grief. But what shook everyone most were the audio clips of Celine's voice messages to friends and her mother, played aloud in court, giving the departed a temporary, heartbreaking presence. Media coverage amplified the pain but also rallied public support. Each day, the courthouse steps filled with a mix of supporters holding photos of Celine, representatives from advocacy organizations, and silent onlookers gripped by the trial's mounting tension. Opinion articles debated not just the singular horror of this betrayal, but larger questions about trust, domestic violence, and how hidden dangers could fester where one least expects them. The defense tried to cast doubt where they could. They pressed Anna on small family disputes, tried to sow confusion about Celine's mental state, and attempted to suggest that gaps in the timeline left the possibility of an outside perpetrator. But as the days passed, inconsistencies in Ben's statements, his changing explanation for stains, internet searches, or forgotten errands, undercut their strategy. Celine's mother submitted a written statement, read aloud by a translator. Her words echoed heartbreak and enduring love, the sleepless nights waiting for calls that would never come, the unbearable silence left in a once bustling Shanghai apartment, the pride she felt for her daughter's courage, and the horror that trust, once broken, can never be made whole again. The emotional climax of the trial came when Anna, summoned for follow-up testimony, broke down describing the ordinary kindnesses Ben had once shown the family. For jurors, and observers everywhere, the rupture of trust felt as profound as the loss of life itself. The justifications offered by the defense felt threadbare against the backdrop of so much tangible, intimate pain. After 4 weeks, deliberations were swift. The jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts, murder in the first degree, evidence tampering, aggravated assault. The sentencing phase saw no plea for clemency. Ben was handed a 45-year sentence without the possibility of parole. In the moments following the judge's declaration, there was no sense of victory, only exhaustion and quiet weeping from Anna as she sat alone, shoulders shaking with a lifetime's worth of grief. Even after the gavel fell, the sense of collapse endured. Celine's friends continued to gather at campus memorials, their conversations orbiting the question of how something so unimaginable could have happened so close to home. Community organizations held seminars and support groups for those struggling with trust and fear. For Anna and Celine's mother, the trial's end was no true conclusion. The journey through loss, betrayal, and ultimately the unraveling of trust itself would stretch on indefinitely, echoing in every memory and every empty chair at the family table. The letter without explanation. In the harrowing aftermath of the trial, as the verdict settled like a leaden blanket over family and friends, another blow arrived, one that was as unsettling as it was enigmatic. Among the boxes of seized evidence and digital devices combed through by law enforcement, investigators uncovered a single handwritten letter tucked deep inside a battered notebook from Ben's home office. Its existence was both a shock and a mystery. Unlike the USBs filled with disturbing images and files that would later serve as incontrovertible proof in court, this letter contained neither admission nor clear apology. It was instead a rambling, deeply ambiguous reflection heavy with undercurrents but devoid of closure. Anna received news of the letter's discovery from the lead detective. She insisted on reading it in person, believing, desperately maybe, that some ghost of remorse or sanity could be found in Ben's own words. Flanked by her sister who had flown in from Shanghai with the help of the consulate, Anna sat in the cold back room of a police station, hands trembling as she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was uneven, filled with scratch-outs and revisions as if written against a rising tide of panic. At the top, only a date and a salutation. To those who look for answers. The letter did not offer much. There were circuitous sentences about regret, about feeling unseen and trapped, about the weight of unmet expectations and the darkness of being passed over in one's own home. It blamed stress, loneliness, and a world that forgot me. Not once did Ben name Celine or refer to the unspeakable violence he'd inflicted. Instead, he wrote of unreciprocated trust and of being a ghost at my own dinner table. There were muddled biblical allusions, angry scribbles about fate, and a repeated refrain that some truths remain locked away. Anna read each line slowly, tears streaming down her face. For all the pain and evil Ben had caused, what stung the most was the utter absence of humanity or accountability in his words. Her sister could not bear even a single paragraph. She turned away, clutching her chest, her sobs made heavier by this final insult. Investigators concluded that the letter was less a confession then a self-pitying, narcissistic diatribe, a last attempt to control the narrative even as the facts in court could not be more damning. Psychologists brought in by the prosecution analyzed it as the product of a man doubling down on his sense of isolation and entitlement. There was no apology, no comfort, no sense of the irreparable harm done to Celine, Anna, or the shattered family. Instead, emptiness, an echo chamber filled only with the writer's own grievances. Word of the letter's content spread quickly, largely because Anna, against advice, chose to speak publicly about its emptiness to the media. "There is no closure when the person who caused the pain refuses even at the end to name it," she said. "Not a single word about Celine, not a word for my sister, for all of us left behind, only cowardice and silence." Social media and student forums buzzed with outrage as transcripts circulated. Mental health counselors reported a surge in calls from other international students and young women who, even without knowing the family, were haunted anew by the idea that sometimes evil leaves not even the decency of a reason. Some described feeling unmoored, rattled by the sharp reminder that not every story yields moral clarity or restorative justice. Anna and her sister, for their part, tore the original letter in half at Celine's memorial the following week. They kept only a fragment, a single line reading, "I am sorry for what could not be undone," though even that, Anna admitted, may have been written without sincerity or intent. They placed it in the memorial garden beside photographs and hand-drawn cards from Celine's classmates, a symbol perhaps not of forgiveness, but of their decision to move beyond Ben's shadow and reclaim what they could of their peace. The letter became, for many in the community, a stark reminder of both the limitations of the justice system and the cruel opacity of some tragedies. Counselors, students, and families discussed it at length in support groups. Should closure depend on the perpetrator's remorse? Was it possible to heal with so many questions left open? The consensus, if there was one, was simple but grim. Survivors must find their own ways to carry on. The silence and cowardice of the guilty cannot and should not dictate the future of the living. In years to come, the memory of that letter, its gaps, its avoidance, its refusal to dignify Celine's name, would linger in the community like a cold draft through a broken window. Anna, ever the protector, would counsel other families struck by loss that explanations, even written in the perpetrator's hand, do not always provide comfort. True closure, she learned, is not received. It is built, day by painful day, by those who remain, who remember, and who choose life in spite of all the words that were never written. A heartbreaking warning for the international community. In the aftermath of everything that had happened, every frantic search, every sleepless night, courtroom storm, and the cold shock of betrayal, an unspoken reckoning rippled through the international student communities not just across Los Angeles but in cities and campuses nationwide. What happened to Celine was no longer simply one family's private heartbreak. It became a cautionary tale whose lessons, and darkness, could not be ignored. The story buzzed through online forums in English, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Russian. It was discussed on WeChat groups, whispered in late-night dorm rooms, debated in student union meetings. The brutality and deception stunned everyone, but what hurt most was the realization that tragedy had grown from the very soil of trust and community, not from a stranger lurking on the periphery. International families who once saw America as an unquestioned land of dreams were shaken to the core. Parents, fearful and heartbroken, flooded their children with messages. Hundreds of students would later admit that well-meaning reminders of safety now arrived almost daily. Don't trust too easily. Share your location. Tell us about your hosts and roommates. Find your people, but don't ever let your guard down. For some, the warnings rang with a desperate urgency. For others, they sounded like a grief song echoing down 1,000 miles of distance and longing. On campus, administrators fumbled to respond. Emergency town halls were organized. International Student Services quickly published new guidelines for host family vetting, roommate interviews, and actionable advice on personal boundaries. Even detailed checklists for warning signs that had always been too uncomfortable to voice aloud. Universities collaborated with consulates, police, and advocacy organizations to bolster counseling, legal support, and self-defense workshops. Posters on bulletin boards now included more than academic deadlines, safety resources, hotline numbers, and banners with the words, "No dream is worth silence," brightened shadowed hallways. Yet for many, fear was only one dimension. Rage simmered under the surface. the outrage of knowing that so much trust could be so thoroughly shattered, and that a system designed to help young people flourish was ultimately powerless to protect everyone. Groups of international students and local allies turned grief into activism. They organized marches bearing Celine's image and the names of other lost or silenced students. Social media campaigns blossomed. #JusticeForceLine, #StudySafe, and #EveryStudentMatters went viral in ways few anticipated. New student-led advocacy initiatives called for better training for host families, more transparent criminal background checks, stronger on-campus protections for vulnerable students, and, perhaps most importantly, safe spaces for survivors to share their truths without fear of stigma or reprisal. For the Asian American and broader diaspora communities, the consequences rippled even further. Celine's case cracked the shell of respectability and quiet deference that many immigrant families had long clung to, forcing public conversations about mental health, domestic violence, and the real risks faced by their children and siblings. Chinese-language radio shows devoted entire broadcasts to advice hotlines and survivor storytelling. Overseas student associations posted testimonials, some heartwarming, others raw and unvarnished. Stories of host homes gone wrong, of isolation combated not by lone heroics, but collective vigilance. And beneath all this, there was mourning, a new kind of grief shaped by recognition, not just of a singular loss, but of a universal, devastating vulnerability. Counselors reported surges in requests for appointments, not only from those who knew Celine but from students who could not sleep for fear of becoming the next news item. Advisors, themselves often immigrants, reassured, comforted, and reminded everyone that support was always available, even when hope felt thin. Some students broke their silence about suspicious or uncomfortable experiences in their own host environments, prompting a handful of investigations and, in one case, preemptive legal intervention. These moments, though painful, became small, tangible victories, proof that vigilance could make a difference, and that no act of speaking out was insignificant. Meanwhile, Celine's family released a statement, read at her memorial, played on news broadcasts, translated and reposted around the world, imploring parents and students everywhere to cherish their bonds, to value courage over comfort, and to never brush aside uneasy feelings simply out of embarrassment or fear of offending. "Her memory will be our warning," Anna said through tears. "We will guard each other as she once tried to guard all her friends. Our grief will sing louder than silence ever could." In time, the shock faded, but the collective sense of fragility did not. Every new semester brought in fresh faces and old anxieties, suitcases lined up at airports, new roommates exchanging tentative conversation, thousands of parents once again trusting the world with their brightest hopes. Across global time zones, a silent pledge echoed, to listen, to look for warning signs in one another's stories, to teach children to honor their instincts above all else, and to build community not just with warmth, but with watchful care. In counseling offices, student lounges, and living rooms brimming with memory and pain, the conversation shifted. There was less naivete now, fewer easy assumptions about safety, replaced instead by a gritty kind of solidarity. Students began forming their own mutual aid groups, rotating who would walk home with whom, sharing tips about safe ride shares and keeping copies of contact info for trusted adults and campus police handy. The notion that it could never happen here or to us was forever lost, replaced by an urgent insistence on practical wisdom and shared responsibility. Workshops and seminars on trauma, boundaries, and emergency protocol became the norm, not the exception. Professors discreetly checked in on international students, making sure no one fell through the gaps during holiday breaks or after long stretches of silence. Community centers saw upticks in participation from students once too shy or proud to seek help. And while some families in far-off cities and provinces decided against sending their children on overseas adventures, many more doubled down. They would prepare their children not with blanket reassurances but with the tools and awareness to face both the wonders and the dangers of an unpredictable world. Advocacy groups inspired by Celine's story began lobbying for public policy reforms. Calls grew louder for better oversight of student homestay programs, clearer reporting channels for abuse or discomfort, and more robust education about protected rights regardless of immigration status. Where previously these topics had been politely veiled or wholly avoided, now they were center stage, discussed by lawmakers, campus leaders, and in the quiet, heartfelt exchanges that form the connective tissue of any diaspora. And then there was hope. Unexpected, stubborn hope. Because for all the darkness Celine's death revealed, it also ignited something fierce and unbreakable within the circles she touched. Each year, scholarships were created in her name to support international students who demonstrated both need and resilience. Storytelling nights and campus-wide remembrance events brought together people of all backgrounds, bridging differences through empathy and renewed commitment to protecting each other. Formerly isolated students found belonging and confidence in numbers. Survivors who once carried their burdens alone drew strength from knowing their voices mattered, their vigilance could save lives. To those who heard of Celine only through headlines, her story was a warning. Never be lulled by appearances, never hesitate to speak out, and never underestimate how much courage it might take to break the silence. For all the procedures, policies, and technological safeguards, sometimes what matters most is the simple human act of listening, whether it's to your own doubts, the small signs in a friend's voice, or the stories that ripple beneath the surface of any new beginning. Celine's loss left a scar but also a legacy, a new determination in the international community to honor her memory not through fear, but through wisdom, vigilance, and compassion. The world remained wide and unpredictable, yet for all who chose to dream beyond borders, her story became both a lighthouse and a memorial, a call to alertness, but also to the enduring bond of shared humanity. The lesson for every student, family, and friend: guard your hope fiercely, support one another, and know that the strength to move forward is always made greater when it is held together.